The entire diplomatic chamber fell into shocked silence when the small Krelthar cub, barely, the size of a large dog but possessing fangs that could pierce, titanium and claws designed to eviscerate prey, latched its crystalline teeth onto Commander Jake Morrison's uniform sleeve, and every alien in the room instinctively reached for weapons because in Krelthar culture, a cub biting an outsider was the first stage of a hunting-kill sequence that always ended in death. But Jake just smiled, gently tugged his sleeve back in the universal play gesture he'd seen the cub use with its mother, and said, "Your turn to pull," in that soft voice humans reserve for children and animals. And the cub's obsidian eyes widened with what could only be described as delight before it tugged back. And suddenly the deadly predator species that had been humanity's enemy for 3 years was playing tug-of-war with a human commander. And in the back of the chamber, 2 Krelthar sisters, High Commander Zareth and her younger sibling Silara, exchanged looks that would change the course of the war and Jake's life forever. Jake Morrison had arrived on the neutral station Meridian 7 as Earth's military representative for peace negotiations, expecting cold formality and strategic maneuvering, but he hadn't expected children, hadn't expected that the fearsome Krelthar warriors who devastated human colonies would bring their young to diplomatic meetings. And he certainly hadn't expected the cub, later he'd learn her name was Tiksha, daughter of High Commander Zareth, to escape her handlers and approach him with that curious head tilt that seemed universal across species. And when she'd bitten his sleeve, Jake's military training had screamed danger, but his instincts, the same instincts that had made him volunteer for xenocultural studies before the war, had recognized play behavior, had seen the lack of actual pressure in the bite, had noticed the cub's relaxed body language. And he'd responded not as a soldier, but as someone who understood that young creatures, regardless of species, just wanted to play. The reaction in the chamber was immediate and chaotic. Krelthar warriors moved to intervene, human security reached for weapons, and the tension that had been carefully managed through hours of preliminary negotiations threatened to explode into violence. But then Zareth, the High Commander whose strategic brilliance had nearly broken Earth's defenses, raised one clawed hand and everyone froze, and she watched with unreadable obsidian eyes as her daughter played with the human, as Tiksha made the thrumming purr growl that meant contentment, as Jake Morrison gently released the sleeve and offered his hand for the cub to sniff. And Zareth saw something in that moment that would haunt her. She saw her daughter, who had been withdrawn and quiet since her father's death in battle, actually happy for the first time in months. Silara, Zareth's younger sister and the diplomatic envoy who'd arranged these negotiations, moved closer to observe, her scaled skin shifting through colors that indicated fascination and concern. And she'd studied human behavior extensively in preparation for these talks. But nothing in her research had suggested humans would respond to Krelthar young with gentleness, with play, with the kind of instinctive nurturing that Krelthar reserved only for their own bloodlines. And she found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about humanity, wondering if perhaps the war had been built on misunderstandings about a species that looked weak but possessed emotional intelligence that the Krelthar, for all their strength, had never developed. Jake, still kneeling with the cub, looked up and found himself meeting the eyes of both sisters. Zareth's were hard and calculating, but held something that might have been hope, while Silara's were softer, curious, reflecting colors he was beginning to recognize as the Krelthar equivalent of a smile, and he understood that this moment, this simple interaction with a child, had shifted something fundamental in the negotiations, had cracked open a door that diplomatic speeches never could. Over the following days, the negotiations continued, but Jake found himself spending increasing time with both sisters, learning that Zareth was a widow whose mate had died in the same battle where Jake had lost his entire squadron, learning that Silara was a brilliant strategist who'd been arguing for peace since the war began, learning that both sisters were caught between duty to their people and growing certainty that the war was a mistake born of fear and miscommunication. And Jake shared his own losses, his own doubts about the conflict, and slowly, carefully, something beyond diplomacy began to grow between them. something complicated by the fact that he was developing feelings for both sisters in different ways. Zareth, with her fierce protective strength and hidden vulnerability, Silara, with her quick mind and gentle humor, and the way she looked at him like he was a puzzle worth solving. The crisis came during week 3 of negotiations, when Tiksha, who'd been spending hours each day playing with Jake, teaching him Krelthar games and learning human ones, building a bond that was unprecedented between their species, fell ill with a rapid-onset condition that Krelthar medicine couldn't treat. And Zareth, watching her daughter fade, her scales going dull and her breathing labored, made a decision that shocked both sides. She asked Jake, asked the human enemy, if there was anything Earth medicine could do, and Jake, remembering a briefing about Krelthar biochemistry, had a crazy idea that the illness looked similar to a human childhood disease that was easily treated with a specific enzyme therapy, and he called Earth Medical Command, and they transmitted the treatment protocol, and Jake personally administered the injection, while Zareth held her daughter and Silara paced anxiously, and they waited in terrible silence until Tiksha's breathing eased and color returned to her scales, and she opened her eyes and reached for Jake, with a small clawed hand, and whispered the Krelthar word for friend. That night, after Tiksha had fallen asleep with her mother watching over her, Silara found Jake on one of the station's observation decks, staring at the stars, and she said quietly, "You saved her. You saved my niece when you could have let her die, when it would have weakened my sister's position in the negotiations, when it would have been strategically advantageous for humanity, so why did you help?" Jake turned to her and said, "Because she's a child? Because I've seen too many children die in this war, human and Krelthar, and I'm tired of it. Tired of fighting. Tired of the hate and Silara. If we can't choose to save a sick child over strategic advantage, then we don't deserve to survive as species, either of us." Silara's scales shifted to colors Jake was learning meant deep emotion, and she stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body. Krelthar ran hot, their metabolism burning like furnaces, and she said, "In my culture, saving a child's life creates a bond debt, a connection that transcends normal relationships, and Jake Morrison, you now hold bond debt from the High Commander's bloodline, which means you're considered family, which means—" She paused, her color shifting to something that looked almost like embarrassment. "Which means that both my sister and I are now honor-bound to offer you a place in our family structure. And Jake, I need you to understand what I'm about to tell you, because it's going to complicate everything." Silara explained that Krelthar family structures were complex, that widowed mothers like Zareth were expected to bond with new partners to help raise offspring, that as Zareth's sister, Silara was also considered a potential mother to Tiksha, and that by saving the child, Jake had placed himself in a position where both sisters could legitimately claim him as a potential bond mate. And Jake's head spun because he'd been developing feelings for both women but had assumed nothing could come of it, had assumed the species barrier and the war and 1,000 other obstacles would make any relationship impossible. And now he was being told that not only was it possible, it was culturally expected. But Silara's next words hit him like a plasma bolt. "The problem is that our people are watching, both our peoples, and they see the human who plays with our children, who saves our young, who treats us like people rather than enemies. And Jake, you're becoming a symbol, becoming hope for peace. But that means you also becoming a political tool. And the hardliners on both sides, the ones who profit from war and fear peace, they're going to force a choice. They're going to make you choose between my sister and me, between the warrior and the diplomat, between military alliance and cultural exchange. And whichever you choose, the other path closes. And Jake, I don't know what to tell you to do because I want you to choose me. I want to show you my world and learn about yours and build something new together. But I also know my sister needs you, needs someone who can help her heal from her mate's death, needs someone Tiksha trusts. And I love my sister more than I want you. But I also can't bear the thought of watching you bond with her while I smile and pretend my heart isn't breaking." Jake listened to this confession, heard the pain in Silara's voice, saw the way her scales flickered through colors that indicated distress, and he did something very human. He pulled her into a hug, and she stiffened in surprise because Krelthar didn't do casual touch. Their embraces were reserved for mates and young children, and then she relaxed against him and made a sound like purring and crying combined. And Jake said, "What if I refuse to choose? What if I reject the premise of the choice entirely? What if there's a third option that nobody's considered because it doesn't fit into established cultural boxes?" The confrontation came the next day, when hardliners from both delegations demanded clarity on Jake's relationship with the Krelthar sisters. When human generals suggested he was being seduced and compromised, when Krelthar warriors accused the sisters of dishonoring their people by pursuing a bond with an enemy, and Zareth, standing tall and fierce in the council chamber, silenced everyone with a roar that rattled the walls and said, "Enough, I am High Commander. My voice carries weight of ancestors and authority of blood, and I declare bond intention toward the human Jake Morrison. And any who challenge this challenge me directly." The room erupted in chaos, and before anyone could respond, Silara stood and said, "I also declare bond intention toward Jake Morrison, as is my right as sister to the High Commander and aunt to Tiksha, who owes life debt, and I will not withdraw my claim." The Krelthar delegation looked shocked because sister rivalry over mates was considered deeply shameful, and the human delegation looked confused because they didn't understand the cultural significance. And then an elder Krelthar warrior, scarred and ancient, stood and said in a voice like grinding stone, "By ancient law, when sisters claim the same potential bond mate, the choice belongs to that mate. He must choose one or we choose for him by denying both. He has until sunset tomorrow to decide. This is the old way. This is tradition." Jake felt the weight of every eye in the chamber, felt the pressure of choosing between two women he cared about, felt the political implications crushing down, and he looked at Zareth, who stood proud but with desperate hope in her eyes, and at Silara, who looked like she was trying not to cry, and he thought about Tiksha, who'd asked him that morning if he was going to be her new father, and he thought about all the children on both sides who died in this stupid war, and he made a decision that would either save everything or destroy everything. And he said clearly, "I choose both. I choose to bond with both sisters, to create a family unit that honors both the warrior and the diplomat, both strength and wisdom, both of the women who've shown me that Krelthar are people worth knowing, worth loving, worth building a future with, and if your ancient laws don't allow for that, then change your laws. Because I'm human, and we're really good at finding creative solutions to impossible problems. We're really good at refusing to accept that we have to choose between two good options. And we're really good at building new structures when old ones don't serve us anymore." The chamber exploded in argument, with Krelthar shouting about tradition and humans demanding to know what the hell their commander was doing. But the ancient warrior held up a clawed hand and silence gradually fell. And he said, "Interesting, very interesting. Humans choose the third path, the path not offered. This is either profound wisdom or profound arrogance. And warrior, you should know that what you propose is not without precedent. In the old stories, before we became so rigid with tradition, there were family units of multiple bonds, usually formed in times of great change or crisis. And one could argue that ending a war and joining two species certainly qualifies as such a time. But there will be tests, there will be challenges. There will be those on both sides who see this as betrayal or weakness. Are you prepared for that?" Jake looked at both sisters, and Zareth was staring at him with something like awe, and Silara was definitely crying now but smiling, and he said, "I'm a human who plays tug-of-war with predator cubs and negotiates peace treaties with people who were trying to kill me 3 months ago. I'm pretty used to doing things that seem impossible. So yeah, I'm prepared." The elder laughed, an actual laugh, and said, "Very well, we will honor the old ways and allow the triple bond. But know this, human. You will be responsible for both sisters, for the child, for bridging our peoples. This is not just personal choice, but political symbol. You will be watched, judged, expected to prove that cooperation between our species is possible. Can you bear that weight?" Jake thought about his squadron that had died, about the Krelthar soldiers he'd killed, about all the loss and pain the war had caused, and he said, "If being in a relationship with two amazing women and helping raise a kid and ending a war is the price I pay for peace, then that's a burden I'll carry gladly." The following months were chaos and beauty intertwined as Jake, Zareth, and Silara navigated the complicated reality of their unprecedented bond, learning each other's languages and customs and needs, dealing with political opposition from hardliners on both sides, raising Tiksha, who thrived with 3 parents who loved her, and slowly, painfully, beautifully building a peace treaty that used their family as a template for cooperation. Jake learned that Zareth's fierce exterior hid a woman who wrote poetry and dreamed of a Krelthar civilization focused on creation rather than conquest, who was brilliant at strategy because she thought 3 moves ahead in everything, including relationships, who needed someone to tell her it was okay to grieve her first mate while loving new partners, and who showed affection through actions, bringing Jake his favorite human foods, teaching him Krelthar combat techniques, protecting him from political enemies with the same ferocity she protected Tiksha. He learned that Silara was funny in ways that transcended species barriers, that she collected earth music and could analyze the mathematical patterns in symphonies, that she was working on a comprehensive guide to human Krelthar cultural exchange, and that she showed love through words, telling Jake daily how much he meant to her, writing him messages in improving English, creating poetry in Krelthar that she'd translate for him. And her favorite thing was lying with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, which she said sounded like Krelthar drums of celebration. The 3 of them developed rhythms and rituals, learning to balance Zareth's need for structure with Silara's spontaneity and Jake's human pragmatism, learning to communicate clearly because assumptions based on one's own species' norms led to misunderstandings. Learning that love across species barriers required patience and humor and the willingness to see the universe through completely different eyes. And most importantly, learning that Tiksha, the cub who'd bitten a sleeve and started everything, was thriving with multiple parents who brought different strengths and perspectives and infinite love. The real test came when extremists from both species attempted to assassinate the Triple Bond family, seeing them as symbols of integration that threatened traditional power structures. And the attack came during a public ceremony formalizing the peace treaty. And Jake saw the weapons being drawn and threw himself in front of Tiksha while Zareth's combat instincts activated, and she became the warrior she'd been trained to be, disarming attackers with lethal efficiency while Silara, who everyone had underestimated as just a diplomat, revealed that she'd trained in Krelthar tactical response and was nearly as dangerous as her sister when protecting family. The assassination attempt failed, but Jake took a plasma burn protecting Tiksha, and as he lay in medical recovering, both sisters stayed by his side, and Tiksha, who was old enough now to understand what had happened, climbed onto the medical bed and said in careful English, "You saved me again, you always save me, your pack, your father, and I choose you too. I choose all 3 of you, and anyone who tries to hurt my family will face my claws when I'm grown." Jake, through the pain medication haze, laughed and pulled the cub close and looked at his 2 partners and said, "You know what the crazy thing is when I came to these negotiations? I thought the best possible outcome was stopping the war. I thought saving lives and preventing more death was the goal. But I was thinking too small. The real victory isn't just peace. It's building something new. It's creating a family that shouldn't exist according to both our species' old rules. It's proving that love and connection are stronger than fear and tradition. And yeah, there are people who want to kill us for it. But there are also people on both sides who see us and start to hope, who start to imagine their own cross-species friendships or partnerships, who start to believe that maybe, just maybe, we're better together than apart." The peace treaty was ratified, built on the foundation of the Triple Bond family that had captured both species' imagination. And while there were still tensions and difficulties and people who opposed integration, the war ended and trade began and cultural exchange programs started, and human children and Krelthar cubs began learning together. And slowly, generation by generation, the fear and hate began to dissolve. Jake, Zareth, and Silara became ambassadors not just officially but personally, their family serving as proof that cooperation was possible. And they raised Tiksha to be fluent in both human and Krelthar culture, to be comfortable in her scales and proud of her mixed heritage. to understand that she was special, not despite being part of a cross-species family, but because of it, and when she came of age and chose to enter diplomatic service herself, focusing on helping other species overcome their differences, her parents, all three of them, attended her ceremony and felt the kind of pride that transcends biology. Years later, when historians studied the Human-Krelthar War and the peace that followed, they would point to many factors: economic pressures, political changes, military stalemates. But those who were there, those who lived through it, they knew the truth. Peace began the moment a predator cub bit a human sleeve and he tugged back with a smile. Peace began when Jake Morrison refused to choose between two sisters and insisted on building something new instead. Peace began when three people from two species decided that love was stronger than tradition and that family could be chosen and created rather than just inherited. And that lesson, that simple, profound lesson about choosing connection over division, about refusing to accept false dilemmas, about building new structures when old ones don't serve us, that's what changed everything. That's what ended the war. That's what created a future where human children and Krelthar cubs played together without fear, where cross-species families became common enough to stop being remarkable, where the question wasn't whether different species could coexist, but how they could thrive together. And at the center of it all was a family that shouldn't have existed, a triple bond that broke every rule. Three parents and one child who'd bitten a sleeve and started a revolution of love and understanding that rippled across the galaxy, proving that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to choose, is insist on finding the third option, is building something new from the pieces of old conflicts and old traditions, and that when someone dares you to choose one sister or let them choose for you, the right answer might just be to choose both, to choose love over law, to choose family over tradition, and to choose the kind of future where predator cubs and human children play together, and the only thing anyone fights over is whose turn it is to tug the sleeve.